There's a reason you can't engage with certain people the way you used to. Why conversations that once felt normal now feel impossible. Why you find yourself withdrawing from situations that everyone else seems perfectly content with. You've been calling it anxiety or depression. Or maybe you've been wondering if something is wrong with you. Carl Jung spent his entire life documenting why this happens. And it's not what you think. What you're experiencing isn't a breakdown. It's something Jung observed in thousands of patients, a specific, dangerous stage of psychological awakening that most people never make it through. Not because they fail, but because they turn back. And here's what makes this stage so dangerous. You can't prepare for it. You can't skip it. And once it begins, you can't unknow what you're starting to see. You already know what I'm about to describe. You've been living it without having words for it. Jung called this stage the confrontation with the unconscious. But that clinical term doesn't capture what actually happens. What actually happens is this. You slowly, almost involuntarily, begin to see through the structures that once held your reality together. The roles you've been playing, the beliefs you've been performing, the version of yourself you've been maintaining for other people. And the terrifying part? You can't perform them anymore. Not because you've decided to stop, but because something in you, something deeper than your conscious will, has already stopped. Your body won't let you. Your soul won't let you. It's not a choice. It's an involuntary awakening. If you've been feeling like you're becoming incompatible with normal life, like you can't engage with things that once felt important, this video will show you exactly what's happening and why Jung believed this stage determines whether you ever become psychologically whole or spend the rest of your life unconsciously performing a role that slowly kills you. Before we go deeper, if something in you is saying, "Yes, this is exactly what's happening to me," subscribe to this channel. We're exploring Jungian psychology and spiritual awakening, not the surface-level version, the real, uncomfortable, transformative version. And leave a heart in the comments if this is landing. It helps me know we're on the right path together. The pattern you've been living. It all starts long before you notice anything is wrong. You build a life. You develop a personality. You learn what behaviors get approval, what masks keep you safe, what versions of yourself make other people comfortable. Jung observed that we all do this. We create what he called the persona, the face we show the world. And there's nothing wrong with this. The persona is necessary. It's how we function in society, how we navigate relationships, how we survive. But here's what Jung discovered through decades of clinical work. For most people, the persona isn't just a mask they wear. It becomes the only self they know. They forget they're performing. They mistake the role for their actual identity. And then life does something interesting. It starts showing you, through your relationships, your repeated patterns, your inexplicable dissatisfactions, that the persona isn't actually you, that you've been living a curated version of yourself so completely that you've lost contact with the person underneath. You don't suddenly realize this. You slowly, almost involuntarily, begin to notice. First, it's just a feeling. A vague sense that something is off. You're doing everything right. Maintaining your relationships, fulfilling your responsibilities, presenting the version of yourself everyone expects. But something feels hollow, performative, false. You can't name it yet. You just feel it. Then you start to see the patterns, the way you modify yourself around certain people, the way you perform enthusiasm you don't feel, The way you say yes when everything in you is screaming no. The way you've been shaping yourself to fit other people's expectations for so long, you can't even remember what you actually want. Jung noticed that this recognition usually begins in the middle of life, what he called the midlife crisis, though it has nothing to do with age and everything to do with consciousness. It's the moment when your psyche can no longer sustain the split between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because once you start seeing the performance, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize the mask, you can't forget you're wearing it. And your entire psychological system begins to rebel against continuing the charade. This is what you're experiencing right now. This is why you can't engage with certain people anymore. Why small talk feels unbearable. Why social situations that everyone else navigates easily leave you feeling completely drained. You're not becoming antisocial. You're not developing anxiety or depression. Though those might be symptoms of what's actually happening. What's actually happening is this. The unconscious parts of yourself, the parts you've been denying, repressing, or simply ignoring for years, are demanding integration. They're refusing to stay hidden anymore. And the persona you've been maintaining, it's starting to crack. The moment of recognition. Then something shifts. You start to see yourself from the outside. You watch yourself perform. You notice the moment you adjust your voice to sound more agreeable. The moment you laugh at something that isn't funny. The moment you pretend to care about a conversation that means nothing to you. And in that moment of watching yourself perform, something fundamental changes. Jung discovered that this moment, this witnessing of your own performance, is actually your consciousness beginning to differentiate from your persona. You're developing what he called the observing ego, a part of you that can see the machinery of your own psychology operating. Most people never develop this. They live their entire lives completely identified with the persona, never realizing they're performing a role. But once this observing consciousness awakens, everything transforms, because now you see it everywhere, not just in yourself, in everyone. You see your mother performing the role of the selfless caregiver, while her actual needs go completely unmet. You see your colleague performing confidence while anxiety pulses underneath. You see your friends performing happiness on social media while privately unraveling. And here's what makes this stage so dangerous. You can't tell anyone what you're seeing, because the moment you point out the performance, you threaten everyone's carefully constructed reality. People don't want to know they're wearing masks. They don't want to see their own unconscious patterns. They need the performance to be real. So you become isolated. Not because you choose to withdraw, but because you can no longer participate in collective unconsciousness the way you used to. Jung experienced this himself during his famous confrontation with the unconscious between 1913 and 1917. He withdrew from his professional life, from his colleagues, from the external validation that had defined his identity as Freud's successor. And what he discovered in that withdrawal became the foundation of all his future work. He discovered that awakening doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like going insane, because your entire reality is deconstructing. The beliefs you organized your life around start to feel arbitrary. The relationships based on your persona start to feel suffocating. The goals you've been pursuing start to feel meaningless. And the terrifying question emerges. If I'm not the person I've been pretending to be, then who am I? This is the dangerous stage Jung spent his life documenting. This is where most people turn back. They recommit to the persona. They double down on the performance. They convince themselves that what they were starting to see wasn't real. Because facing what's underneath, facing the actual contents of your unconscious, requires a level of courage most people simply cannot access. I need to pause here, because if you're feeling this shift in yourself, if you can't engage with surface-level interactions the way you used to, you need to know you're not alone. Millions of people are going through this same awakening right now. Hit that like button not for the algorithm, but as a way of saying, I see this in myself. And share this with someone who's been feeling this struggle. They need to hear this. The uncomfortable truth. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The contents of your unconscious aren't random. They're not just repressed memories or forgotten experiences. They're the disowned parts of yourself. The qualities, desires, and potentials you rejected because they didn't fit the persona you were constructing. He called this the shadow. And encountering your shadow is what makes this stage so dangerous. Because your shadow contains everything you've spent your entire life trying not to be. If your persona is kind and agreeable, your shadow holds your rage and your capacity to say no. If your persona is strong and independent, your shadow holds your need for dependency and care. If your persona is rational and controlled, your shadow holds your chaos and your wild, untamed instincts. And here's the mechanism Jung observed. You don't just repress these qualities internally, you project them outward. You see them in other people and react with disproportionate emotion. Every person who triggers you is showing you your shadow. Every quality you judge harshly in others is a disowned part of yourself. Every recurring relationship pattern is your psyche trying to show you what you're refusing to integrate. Your life is a perfect mirror of your unconscious. Jung worked with a patient, a successful businessman who came to therapy because of recurring conflict with his employees. He described them as lazy, unmotivated, always taking advantage of him. Session after session, Jung listened to him rage about these incompetent people who were ruining his business. And then Jung asked him a simple question. What would happen if you allowed yourself to rest? The man looked at him like he was insane. Rest? He couldn't rest. If he rested, everything would fall apart. His entire identity was built on being productive, driven, disciplined. Rest meant weakness. Rest meant failure. And in that moment, Jung showed him the projection. The lazy employees he was raging against weren't actually lazy. They were carrying his disowned need for rest. They were living out the part of him that desperately wanted to stop performing, to stop driving, to simply be. His psyche was showing him, through his external reality, what he was refusing to acknowledge internally. This is what you're seeing now. The people who irritate you most are holding parts of your shadow. The situations that trigger disproportionate emotional reactions are reflecting unconscious patterns. The recurring problems in your life aren't random. They're your soul trying to communicate what needs to be integrated. And once you see this, once you really see that your external reality is reflecting your internal state, you can't engage with life the same way anymore. You can't blame other people for your triggers. You can't avoid the patterns. You can't pretend the problems are out there when they're clearly originating from within your own unconscious. This is why this stage is so dangerous. Because taking responsibility for your shadow means taking responsibility for your entire reality. It means acknowledging that you're not a passive victim of circumstance. You're an active creator of your experience through your unconscious projections. And most people cannot handle this level of responsibility. So they turn back. They recommit to the persona. They continue projecting their shadow onto others and blaming the external world for their internal state. But if you're watching this video, if you're recognizing these patterns in yourself, you've already gone too far to turn back. Something in you has already seen through the illusion. And now the real work begins. The integration process. This is where it gets difficult, because seeing the pattern isn't enough. Jung observed that intellectual understanding, knowing about the shadow, reading about projection, learning psychological concepts, changes nothing. The persona can absorb all of this information and use it to create a new, more sophisticated mask. Now you're not just performing normalcy, you're performing awakening. Genuine transformation doesn't happen through knowing. It happens through a slow, often painful process of integration. And integration means feeling. Not thinking about your shadow, but actually feeling the disowned emotions. Not understanding your patterns intellectually, but actually sitting with the parts of yourself you've spent your entire life avoiding. You don't suddenly decide to integrate your shadow. You slowly, almost involuntarily, begin to notice that you can't keep avoiding it. The parts you've been repressing start demanding attention. The emotions you've been suppressing start surfacing uncontrollably. The aspects of yourself you've been denying start showing up in your dreams, your slip-ups, your inexplicable behaviors. Jung experienced this intensely during his confrontation with the unconscious. He didn't just think about his shadow. He actively engaged with it through a practice he called active imagination. He dialogued with the figures from his unconscious. He allowed the repressed material to surface. He sat with emotions that terrified him. And what he discovered was this: the shadow isn't actually dangerous. The energy you spend repressing it, that's what's dangerous. That's what creates neurosis, psychosomatic illness, destructive behavioral patterns. The shadow just wants to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated into the wholeness of who you are. But here's the paradox Jung kept returning to. You can't integrate your shadow by fighting it. You can't become whole by rejecting parts of yourself. You can't transcend the persona by creating a new, more spiritual persona. You become whole by accepting what is, by allowing the disowned parts to exist, by releasing the need to be the version of yourself you thought you should be. And this is excruciating, because it means grieving. You're grieving the identity you built, the person you thought you were, the life you imagined you were supposed to have, the relationships that were based on your persona rather than your authentic self. There's real loss in this awakening. Jung knew it, I know it, you're living it. Part of you is terrified right now. The ego, the conscious identity you've been maintaining, is fighting for its survival. It knows that if you continue this process, if you actually integrate your shadow, the person you've been pretending to be will die. And it's right, that person will die. The persona can't survive genuine awakening. But here's what Jung discovered through his own dark night and through thousands of patients. What dies isn't actually you. It's the false construction you built to survive. And what emerges in its place is something far more real, far more authentic, far more alive. You're not becoming someone new. You're releasing who you never actually were. The integration process looks different for everyone, but Jung observed consistent patterns. You slowly begin to reclaim your projections. When someone triggers you, instead of reacting, you ask, "What is this showing me about myself?" When a pattern repeats, instead of blaming circumstances, you look for the unconscious belief creating it. When an emotion surfaces, instead of suppressing it, you allow it to move through you. You gradually stop performing for others and start being authentic. Not through a decision to be authentic, that's just another performance, but through a slow, involuntary inability to keep pretending. Your body won't let you. Your soul won't let you. The mask physically cannot stay in place anymore. You begin to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites without collapsing into one or the other. You can be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and dependent, both rational and emotional. You stop splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, wholeness begins to emerge. Before we go to the final section, I want to hear from you. Comment below with one pattern or realization you've had related to awakening and shadow work. Your story matters because someone else is experiencing the same thing and needs to know they're not crazy. They're transforming. Drop a heart on the comments that resonate with you most. The transformation. But here's what happens when you stop fighting the process and start accepting it. You don't become better. You become whole, and wholeness looks nothing like what you imagined. Jung observed that people who successfully integrate their shadow don't become more spiritual, more enlightened, more evolved than others. They become more human, more real, more capable of genuine connection. They stop performing harmony and become comfortable with conflict. They stop performing happiness and become capable of authentic joy. They stop performing strength and discover actual resilience. Because when you're no longer using all your energy to maintain a persona, when you're no longer suppressing half of your psyche, when you're no longer projecting your shadow onto everyone around you, you finally have access to your actual life force. And life force doesn't look like the spiritual persona promises. It's not always peaceful. It's not always positive. It's not always light. Life force is messy, contradictory, sometimes dark, sometimes wild, sometimes completely inappropriate for polite society. But it's real. And real is what you've been craving underneath all the performance. Jung noticed something profound in his patients who completed this integration. They became boring to their old social circles, not because they were less interesting, but because they stopped providing the drama that unconscious relationships feed on. They stopped engaging with projections. They stopped participating in collective shadow dynamics. They stopped playing the roles everyone expected. And this creates a different kind of isolation. Not the terrifying isolation of the early stages, the feeling that you're going insane while everyone else seems fine, but a chosen solitude. A recognition that genuine connection requires two people who are conscious of their own patterns, who have done their own shadow work, who can relate authentically rather than through projection. You start to recognize your people, not by shared interests or demographics, but by a quality of presence. You can feel when someone is performing versus when they're being real. You can sense when a conversation is happening on the surface versus when it's touching something deeper. And you become extraordinarily selective about where you invest your energy. Because you're no longer trying to be liked by everyone. You're no longer modifying yourself to fit into spaces that require you to be smaller, quieter, more acceptable. You're discovering what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were conditioned to be. And here's what makes this transformation so profound. You don't lose your capacity for connection. You lose your capacity for false connection. You don't become less loving. You become incapable of performing love while feeling resentment. You don't become less engaged with the world. You become engaged with reality rather than with collective fantasy. Your relationships transform. The ones based on your persona fall away, sometimes painfully, sometimes with relief. And the ones based on authentic connection deepen in ways you didn't know were possible. Your work transforms. If it was serving the persona, proving your worth, seeking external validation, performing success, it becomes unsustainable. And either you find a way to do it authentically, or you discover you need to do something entirely different. Your entire life reorganizes around what's actually real, instead of what you thought was supposed to be real. Jung called this the second half of life, not chronologically, but psychologically. The first half is about building the persona, achieving in the external world, fitting into society. The second half is about dismantling all of that and discovering what remains when the performance stops. And what remains is you. Not the curated version, not the acceptable version, not the version that makes other people comfortable. Just you. Whole, contradictory, imperfect, real. So what does all of this mean? It means what you thought was a crisis. This inability to engage with life the way you used to. This feeling of becoming incompatible with normal society. This terrifying sense that something fundamental is changing isn't a breakdown. It's the dangerous stage of awakening Jung spent his entire life documenting. And it's dangerous not because it will destroy you, but because most people turn back. They see what's underneath the persona and decide it's too much. They glimpse their shadow and convince themselves it's better to keep it repressed. They feel the isolation that comes with consciousness and retreat back into collective unconsciousness. But if you're here, if you're recognizing your own journey in these patterns, you've already passed the point of no return. Something in you has already seen through the performance, and you can't unsee it. Jung would want you to know this isn't punishment. It's not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that your psyche is demanding wholeness, that your soul is refusing to keep living a half-life. Every moment of discomfort is your unconscious communicating what needs to be integrated. Every person who triggers you is showing you your shadow. Every pattern that repeats is an invitation to see deeper. This process can't be rushed. Your job isn't to force the transformation or fix yourself or speed through the dark night. Your job is to be present with what's falling away and curious about what's emerging. And remember, you're not alone in this. All over the world, souls are waking up and going through the same confrontation with the unconscious. We're all discovering that awakening doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like everything you knew yourself to be is dying. And it is. But death isn't the end. It's the precondition for genuine life. You're not losing yourself. You're finding yourself underneath all the layers you built to survive. And that takes time, courage, and enormous compassion for the person you're becoming. If this resonates, if you're recognizing your own journey in these patterns, watch our video on Jung's concept of the shadow next. We go even deeper into how to work with the disowned parts of yourself. And subscribe, because we're just beginning to explore the depths of Jungian psychology and the actual process of awakening. The dangerous stage isn't behind you. You're in it right now. And the question isn't whether you'll survive it. It's whether you'll have the courage to let it transform you completely.